Hey y'all, I did a video yesterday and it was kind of just where are they now 10 years later for all the key players in the Adelson saga and the Dan Markel murder. And I thought I would give a backstory, even though there are so many backstories out there, way better than mine, and much better produced videos. But I just thought I would give a quick synopsis of what exactly happened rather than just where are the key players now. So I'm going to start off by the wedding because that to me is where everything started to go wrong in terms of Wendi, what she did, because it was her parents that screwed up because they were responsible for the catering and they screwed up the kosher versus kosher style food, which is almost laughable, but you can almost just see Donna's deviousness even that early on. But anyway, so when Dan found out that there were non-kosher foods being served, he kind of freaked out, which is understandable because he had rabbi there that couldn't even eat and he had to rush out and get the rabbi some food. And, Donna was not very apologetic from what I understand. And Wendi almost right then and there laid down the gauntlet and sided with her family. Because if she truly felt Dan's pain after just marrying him earlier that day, what she should have done was to show her support for the snafu, and she could have walked around with Dan from table to table, and they could have said, "Oh, we're so sorry," and sincerely apologized, and that would have shown Dan, I'm sure, that she was behind him and not choosing her family's side so early on in the first problem that they had. So subsequently, I'm sure that that was the behavior that Wendi displayed. Of course, I wasn't there, but it's so obvious in all that has come out. Some poster had told me that I have no idea what goes on and have no right to speak about it, and I beg to differ because I think I know more about this saga than what's going on in my own life, even though that's sad, but I think it's true. And so, because there are depositions and there are people that have sworn testimony, and you can, I'm not going to say 100% I know anything, but 95%, yes, I do. So anyway, I think by Wendi choosing her family over Dan at that early juncture just kind of set the stage for how their marriage was going to play out. And also, from what I understand, she really wanted to be in Miami, and Dan was willing to try to live in Miami, but when he applied for a position at Miami University or whatever it's called, he didn't get the position either that he wanted or won at all, and he wasn't offered a position up in Tallahassee, and I'm sure that Wendi agreed to it, but I can't fault her for this. You go from I'm from New York, and you go from a really fast-paced environment with a lot of, restaurants and big, tall, beautiful buildings and clean cities, and you go to a rural area where there's almost nothing going on, and it's definitely a culture shock, and she probably didn't realize how much she would miss Miami. But I think she just went about it all wrong. But anyway, so they have two boys, and supposedly she slowly became unhappy in the marriage because she felt inferior to Dan. Now, whether it was because he made her feel that way or she just felt that way, I mean, I don't like to, suppose I wasn't there, but just judging from all the public speaking that I've seen Wendi do on causes that are so close to her heart, that you would think that would remove a lot of her nervousness, because she's very informed and very passionate about these sex trafficking, issues. And so when she gives public speaking, even so much as recently as the bar mitzvah, anytime a camera is on her and she has to talk, she is so, in the 5-hour interview, she's a mess. She's so nervous. She giggles a lot. She has inappropriate expressions on her face. Now, the weird part is that on the stand, the 3 times that she was on the stand, She was very collected, very professional, very calm and cool. And it makes you wonder, why couldn't she tap into that when she was teaching at FSU or giving any of these public addresses? She's just a mess. She's just so inconsistent. But in any case, so I think she thought her and Dan were going to be a power couple. And he did, in fact, when he got to FSU, he did get a position for her, and also managed to get a book that she had written that he supposedly doesn't like fiction, so he didn't really support it. But if he's not supporting it, he got it to be the book that students are forced to read, or required to read, I should say. I don't think they force them. And so he was looking out for her and trying to pave the way for her as well, not just his own future. But somewhere along the way, she just became very unappreciative, very down on Dan, very unhappy in Tallahassee. And I guess because he was thriving and she was wilting, it became a big problem for them. And as I mentioned, I think they had 2 sons, and just out of the blue, now this is up for debate because there are comments that she's made, testimony that she's given that says that they went for marriage counseling, and she had warned the counselor and Dan that she wanted a divorce, but she was agreeable to counseling. But I don't know if that's true, because I've never seen anything except her words to that effect. Well, in any case, the counseling, according to her, failed, and she just wanted out. So she just ambushed him one day. He had left town for something with school, a trip, and he's called her a couple of times in the few days leading up to him being away. Well, she never answered. Why? Because she was busy packing and pillaging their whole house, the bank accounts, renting a new home, and just such subterfuge to get away from him, because she claimed she was scared or that she would never get him out of the house. But I'm sorry, I think you could get a policeman or someone to accompany you to, if it were that, scary a situation, to serve your husband with divorce papers. I don't buy anything she's selling. Nothing. But anyway, so she calls him up after avoiding his call for a couple of days, and she's like, "Hey, I'm divorcing you." And he was like, "What?" He's like, "Don't do this. Don't break up our family. Please, Wendi." And she was like, "Nope, mine's made up. I'm out." And dropped the mic. And so, he rushes home, doesn't give his speech. He got the call at like 11 o'clock in the morning, according to Chris DeCoste, and was home, walking in the door like 10 hours later from being across the country. But it was too late. She was already gone. The house was practically empty. There were some things left, like children's clothes that didn't fit anymore, furniture that she never liked to begin with. But she had taken everything she wanted. Like I said, she emptied his bank accounts. She took half. But again, that's up for debate too, because in later filings, he claims that she took a lot more. And so that's never been solved. Why? Because, here we go. So with all the back and forth, Wendi complaining leading up to this divorce, she was always crying to her mother. And her mother was subsequently crying to Charlie, because Charlie always had 2 hours free every day when he would drive all around to do his wandering dentistry. And she would get Charlie worked up, and she would get worked up, and it was just a back and forth, and it was just really getting crazy. And eventually, Charlie, being who he is, this, he's like this goofy blowhard who has this overblown impression of himself, and he loves pleasing mommy, so he went ahead, and I think the way the plan was hatched, to be honest, was Donna probably saying something like, "Oh, I wish he was dead," and then Charlie, with his quick wit nod, said something like, "Well, that could be arranged," and before you know it, a plan was hatched, and he went ahead and met with Kathy Magbanua, who was a new receptionist at his job. And he kind of, I think, got the impression from the way she talked, she was kind of streetwise, and she was going to, he thought he could probably meet the underbelly of society through her. So he takes her out on a date, and according to her testimony, which finally was honest after 3 times being on the stand and her getting a life sentence, just this last trial for Charlie, she admitted that he had asked her if she knew anyone that could harm somebody. And as it turned out, she said, I do, my husband, and a plan was hatched. Now, at this point, she is supposedly separated from her common law husband, Sigfredo, but she hires him, and he, who is not a gang member, he's just some out-of-work loser that's always running to strip clubs and doing drugs and drinking, and he's a mess. And they have 2 children together, and he occasionally gives her child support, but really not a good dad. And he enlists his friend, Rivera, who, Sigfredo, Garcia, Rivera, their names, everyone in this story, everybody confuses their names. I've never seen anything like it. It's just weird how that is. Nobody can get anybody's name straight the first try. But anyway, so he enlists his best friend, Louis, who is the head of the Latin Kings chapter in Miami, to go do some kind of reconnaissance drive up to Tallahassee. And then they don't do anything that day, but they go back a month later, and lo and behold, it's never clear who actually shot Dan Markel. Louis says it was Sigfredo, and since he was the one that copped to the plea first, the police took his word, but I'm not sure that that's true. But anyway, and here's the part that's really amazing. So a neighbor was looking out the window for whatever reason and saw the Prius drive off, which was so fantastic because he was able to give a description to the cops, and they were able to get city bus footage, and they were able to nail who those 2 driving away were from the rental car. But the part that is so amazing is after Dan was shot, he was critically injured that day, but he died the next day, unfortunately. And he was critically injured, and they went and picked up Wendi. And she was having lunch with some friends, which I'm just going to touch on this basically for a second because there's so much surrounding it. You could look on the internet. But before she went to lunch with her friends, she drove right past Dan's house and the crime scene. And she says it was just an innocent little drive on her way to get liquor for a party she was going to. But there is so much surrounding that drive. She was even seen by a policeman pulling up and then all of a sudden doing a quick K-turn and driving away. And the reason why I believe the policeman is he made such a good point that every single other person that drove up to the crime scene and then was forced to turn around because of the crime scene tape, nobody turned around right away. Every single person kind of stopped for a minute and they gawked a little bit, and they also probably had to, in their head, figure out, okay, we can't take this route, let's see what we'll do. And so there was a delay of a minute or 2 minutes, but not Wendi. She just supposedly put it in gear she drove up, saw what she saw, put it in gear, and backed away. So that's kind of but everything is that Wendi does. But anyhow, so the interesting part is that when Detective Isom went and picked up Wendi to tell her that there was a shooting and her husband was involved, there's a lot of, I don't know, some people say that she was told right away that it was, her husband, and she didn't have to worry about her boys who were in daycare. But some people say, and from the interview, it's not 100% clear if she even knew what had happened. And, it's just all murky. But hopefully, if she gets arrested and Georgia gets a hold of those transcripts and everything else, we'll get a 100% definitive story. Anyhow, so here's the crazy part. So the detective asked her outright, do you know anyone that would want to harm your husband? And she right away volunteers Well, my brother said that as a joke, he would, bought me a TV because it was cheaper than hiring a hitman. And Detective Isom was like, what? And she repeated it and she said, oh, and it was so awful because I repeated that same joke to the Best Buy repairman because, by the way, she was having a TV repaired on the same day that Dan was shot. And there's just, again, I'm not going to get into that because that's just so, you really have to get the details of the story to follow it 100%. But what I wanted to touch on was how amazing it was that they even were led in the direction of the Adelsons through this one phone call. So while Charlie is dating Katie, before he, warms up, I guess, to asking her and setting her up to set up this hit, he's courting her and he's taking her jet skiing, and Sigfredo Garcia at the time is kind of spying on her or stalking her, whatever you want to call it. And he somehow finds out who the dentist is. And he calls the practice, but somehow he got a hold of Harvey's cell phone number, or maybe it was the Adelson practice. I'm not sure what number he left the threatening message on. He thought he had Charlie, and he said, you better stay away from my wife or I'm going to, effing kill you. And when the police, this is like the most amazing thing, because without this, there probably never would have been an initial link. So when the police immediately took the bus footage from the Prius and was able to identify the Prius and the rental car company and then get the phone numbers for Luis Garcia and Sigfredo, they went further than that and they did a tower dump, which was, from the cell phone tower in the area, and they were able to get a bunch of phone calls from that. And then somehow they were able to research all the calls that had been dialed or received calls. And lo and behold, through this billions of records, I mean, it was just, you talk about a needle in a haystack. This was a piece of hay in the haystack that might have sort of kind of could have looked like a needle. It's crazy. And they were able to get the Adelsons' communication for that one time, even though it was just a phone call from Sigfredo to Charlie or Harvey, not sure. And from there, they were able to just start looking at records and phone calls, and everything unwound. And unfortunately, they weren't able to pin anybody to this crime. After 2 years, they had all this information, but, nobody's talking about anything, of course, and they couldn't make any charges stick. But after 2 years, they decided to do this bump, which is when you try and get the parties talking, you get a wiretap, and you do something to create some chatter. And so they start with Donna Adelson. This undercover man goes over to the daycare where she's picking up the two boys, because by now Wendi has uplifted their whole lives the next day and brought them all to Miami, and now she's where she wants to be. And he walks over to Donna with a piece of paper, and it says, $5,000, and it's got a picture of Dan Markel. And the hitman, the bump guy, he goes, Mrs. Adelson, and she's like, yes. And he says, hi. He said, we know you've been taking care of Katie, but my brother, Tuto or whatever, has been in jail because of your problem up north that he solved for y'all, and we need him taken care of too. And here's some instructions on what we want you to do. Now, at this point, which I believe is the most damning evidence against Donna, instead of just looking around really quick, like, is there a cop around, or screaming, what, or any kind of reaction, hundreds of reactions that normal, uninvolved people would have, she does the one thing that a guilty person would do. And she takes the paper from him and she slips it in her pocket and just walks away. And from there, she calls Charlie, and Charlie calls Katie, and Katie calls Sigfredo, and it's just, then they start to get, involvement up the yin-yang with all these calls, and they're able to put a case together to get what they call the low-hanging fruit, which was Sigfredo and Luis, and then Katie. And so they finally get all 3 convictions, and the rest, and then on the eve of, I think, Katie's retrial, they arrested Charlie, and that was like amazing. I mean, you could hear the cheer. I'm surprised there weren't like national fireworks, because that was big. That was very big. And then they, after 3 weeks, so Charlie was convicted, and goodbye, Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. And then 3 weeks after Charlie was convicted, they arrested Donna. And it's kind of weird, because I mentioned this in the upcoming part 2 that's attached to this, but it's just so bizarre that Donna was, if you ever looked at any of her pictures when she was on the outside living her life, she was always pleasant looking. She kept herself really well, attractive woman. And then when she got arrested, and there are rumors that she was addicted to Xanax and all these different things, so maybe that's what's responsible for, during the couple of hearings that she appeared at, she seemed so weird looking. I mean, if you Google her pictures, she looks like an ape, and her mouth is so weird, and she's so angry and crazy. She looks insane. But fast forward to now, she fired the lawyer that she had, and she's gotten local counsel in addition to the lawyer that represented Charlie. And don't even ask, because that's a whole nother thing. His name is Daniel Rashbaum, and I have a couple of videos about him if you want to check him out. But again, there are much better videos than mine all over the internet. Very interesting story. But in any case, he somehow has Donna completely under control, because when you flip to the past where she was, making eye rolls and saying outbursts and just being so poorly behaved, that I was like, oh man, she's going down, down, down. But now I'm not so sure, because he has completely altered her behavior with all his pep talks, I guess, and she's very well behaved and pleasant, and I'm sure once she gets dolled up, and if it continues on this path, there's a good chance she might beat this rap, which would be terrible. But anyway, so then all that's left is to get Wendi and Harvey. Now, Wendi seems like an impossibility, and Harvey seems even that much more impossible. So there is a chance that we're just going to have to be satisfied with the 5 convictions, if we even get Donna, and Harvey and Wendi going free, or Donna, Wendi, and Harvey going free. But they've got more than 50%, and the reason that I am just so convinced that they might not go past if Donna doesn't get a conviction. Why would you? I mean, there's so much going on in in Florida, and even, I'm sure, Tallahassee, which is a quieter town, but still, I would think that they need to use their resources for local crimes, and this has gotten so expensive, I can't even imagine the cost. So it might stop here, but anyway, so that's the story, the fairy tale horror story, if you will. And now I've just given a synopsis of 10 years later where all the players are. And that's it, y'all. So fingers crossed, justice for Dan. Thanks, y'all. Bye. Hey, y'all. So it's been a while since I fixated on the Adelson case. But I was just sitting here thinking about all the different players and what their roles were, and how weird it is that, 10 years later, we only have 4 of them, on our way to getting the 5th. But I have a very bad feeling about Donna's conviction. I don't know why, but maybe just because it's going to pass the 10-year mark, and maybe because Rashbaum doesn't seem on the up and up, that he's up to something, and somehow he's going to pull a rabbit out of his hat and get Donna to walk. It's almost like if everything you see him say, it's almost like he knows something that nobody else knows, and that's why he's so confident. So for argument's sake, let's say we just have the bottom 4 pieces of fruit, low hanging as they say, And I was thinking about all of them because, for starters, let's start at the top with Harvey. I just really do believe that he not only sanctioned everything, because I wouldn't normally have thought he did, because he seemed like he was busy being a dentist and had no idea that his wife was obsessing so bad over Dan, and the lengths that she would go to see him snuffed out. And I wasn't sure of his involvement. All these months and months of poring over everything, I was like, I just can't say. But when I saw him at the airport when Donna was being arrested, I became convinced that any man that could love a woman, to the degree that he showed that he still loved her by so lovingly removing her earrings and her locket, and just how lost he seemed, and I was like, okay, they know. They share a secret. That's what makes people that close, I think. I mean, they could be that close if there was no dirty secret shared. People can love each other to that degree. But if one of them is as vile a person as Donna, to be able to commit, the hit of somebody on her son-in-law, well, that's a pretty horrible person, and I just don't see another person loving them to the degree that Harvey loves Donna and cares for her so much, even more importantly, because I have seen some people hopelessly in love, like sick puppy dogs, that their love is not caring, it's just lust or whatever you want to call it. But in their case, I see him caring for her as much as loving her, and therefore I reached the conclusion that for him to feel that strongly about her, knowing what she did, because at this point he obviously knows, unless he is the stupidest man that ever walked the planet, and he knew nothing about it, he would not be able to love her and care for her to that degree. So that's Harvey. I'm convinced of his involvement. And then Donna, she's a hard one, because I cannot believe her turnaround, and I'm not crazy about it. I mean, if you look at all the pictures of her, prior to her being arrested, she never looked ugly. She didn't look like a monkey. She didn't look like a crazy ape. She was normal looking, and then she got arrested, and the few displays that she had in court where she was just so wacky-eyed, and her, just her expressions were just horrid, and she just looked like a psycho. And I was so convinced that she was going down, because she would not be able to keep herself under control, and she was just going to alienate the jury to such a degree that they'd come back in 20 minutes instead of 35 or whatever Charlie's conviction was. But since she has been able to turn it around, that's got me worried. Because if you remember at her hearing, she did a, I'm never sure if it's a 360 or a 180, because if you do a 360 turn, you wind up exactly where you are. So I guess it's a 180 where it's supposed to be totally the opposite, but I've heard people say 360 and mean 180, so I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me. But she did a complete turnaround during her hearing, and she was so polite to the judge and so contained and so well-mannered and just totally in control of herself and her actions. And if that's the Donna that's going to get presented for the next, few hearings, and then at trial, and then if she even gets on the stand, we're going to have something to worry about, because she's not going to come off the way she would have if she would have continued down that path when she had that crazy Mariscalvo lawyer. The two of them were going to self-destruct in 20 minutes if they kept going. So I'm a little worried about Donna's conviction. I just think she might somehow get out of this. It's just a thought. All right, and then there's Charlie. There's really nothing to be said for Charlie. I mean, everything in the world has been said for Marshmallow Charlie, except that if you have not caught that video of him dancing with June on one arm and Katie on the other to Dean Martin's I don't even know what the song is that he used. I forget now, but it is the most entertaining video you will ever see, and it's called Marshmallow Charlie, and it's on the Society Page's video page on YouTube, and it just gives you such a good feeling. You got to laugh and smile, which is crazy, but it does. And so for Charlie, I really don't have anything to say. I mean, he's toast. He's in denial. I think he's actually convinced himself that he had no part in this. He's a goner. So I really can't think of anything to say except that I was getting kind of hopeful in those last couple of jail calls that got not televised, but that we got the audio to, that he was gonna turn on Wendi, and quick. Because each call, he was just more fixated on Wendi and more fixated on her. And, I was like, okay. And maybe if Donna hadn't been arrested, he could have worked his mom up and his mom could have worked him up. Although we don't know what's brewing now because we don't hear any more calls. So we can be, leave it to our imagination. But I don't like to do that. I really like some cold, hard facts before I get my hopes up for anything. So... on Charlie, I don't think he's at this point gonna flip, because it sounded like they were gonna, and I thought, oh, maybe Wendi will be arrested by January 1st or something, but it didn't happen. So next is Wendi, but we'll get to her last, saving the worst for last in this case. And then there's Katie, and I have to say, not that I want to defend anybody in this mess, but I have to say, when I was listening to her at the beginning, when she first came out, and I saw her, and she just looked like a breath of fresh air to me. It was like somebody had opened up the windows, and when they asked her those first few questions, and they were like, were you involved in this? And she said, yes. Did you lie? Yes. And I was listening to her truth, and I was just like, being blanketed in comfort to finally hear somebody coming so clean. But then I have to say, I thought her testimony derailed a little bit towards the middle and end because of Georgia, because I think that Georgia was so afraid that Katie was going to derail and maybe mess up, that instead of allowing Katie to answer questions in her own words that would have been very truthful, I believe, at that point when she was already on the truth train, she kind of cut her short and clipped her wings and just started asking her yes and no questions. And I'm sorry, but when you sit there and you just say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, I don't consider that testimony. So towards the middle and the end, Katie, I wasn't as impressed with her. I wish Georgia would have handled her totally different. But I do understand, it's not for me to say how she needs to handle her witnesses, but I think she would have gotten more mileage out of Katie this time around if she would have asked her non-leading questions. And I still thought, even though Katie did give some information, I still think there's some more there, and that's the part I can't understand, because if you look at the Katie proffer, I was amazed that Georgia was even able to rehabilitate her to the point that she did when she first got on and started testifying. She was so honest. And in the two proffers, she was still like such a mess and stuck back in the, I wasn't involved. And then when she kind of wanted to come clean, it was like pulling teeth. It was the most painful interview to watch. So I was very surprised that she, was so forthcoming in this last trial, in Charlie's trial. So that impressed me. But again, we'll see. Maybe in the fourth trial, Georgia will get her to let it all hang out, and that she's holding out for that, because I'm hoping that Katie can get somewhat of a reduced sentence. And then we go to Lewis, and Lewis, I just didn't feel that his testimony in any of the three trials and in the proffer was completely honest. I definitely believe it had grains of truth in it, but I really believe that if it's going to come down between him and some Sigfredo, who pulled the trigger, he has every motivation to lie, because according to the things that I've read, if he did cop to being the trigger man, there was no way they were only going to offer him 19 years because he killed Dan, even though there's the culpability law and all of that, where if one goes down for the murder, they all go. Generally speaking, the trigger man will do the most time. And so I think he had incentive to lie, so I don't think he was completely trustworthy in that regard. There was the language barrier, which he proved in the third trial, where they asked, did you go to the prof's blog? And he was like, Wendi was the blog, but he thought she said blonde, and it was almost cute. But no, I don't believe that he 100% was telling the truth or understood the questions to the point where he could give completely truthful answers. And then, and I mentioned this in some video I did, it was very surprising to me, because everybody has said the whole time, oh, he took a picture of an owl and he posted on Instagram, and Katie called him and told him, take that shit down. And when I was watching either one of his proffers or one of the earlier trials, I swear to you, they asked him about the Instagram, and he said, well, I took a picture of a lion and I posted it, and Katie told Sigfredo, get that shit off of there. And I thought I was hearing things, so I went back and rewound the video, whichever one it was, and I tried to find it just so I could cite it here to let y'all see it, but I could not find it. But I know for a fact he said lion. So if anyone in the comments does remember hearing him say lion, I would love for y'all to put it down in the comments. And if you know where it was, I'd love to see it again, because I hate to quote anything if I'm not 100%, but I think I am on this one. But anyway, so I don't think that he was the most credible witness. I mean, they're all just such a bunch of thugs, I guess, that you really can't tell which one is worse than the other. And I would not say that he was the most credible. He had the most to gain. Yeah, absolutely. But the most credible? Not buying that. Anyway, and then there's Sigfredo, who, to this day, I cannot understand why we have not heard from him. It blows my mind. I mean, I would think that, I don't know that he has any real evidence, that he could offer any testimony other than, because let's face it, he never really talked to any of the key players. I don't think any of the Adelsons. I think it was like what they explained about how train cars and nobody ever talked to the one above it. And that makes perfect sense. But I still think that he'd be able to refute some of the facts that are out there where Harvey, it's kind of murky what his dealings with Harvey were. So I think he could set all that straight if he were to come completely clean. But it's just so weird to me that we have never heard a word from Sigfredo. Just very bizarre. And then, of course, that brings us to Wendi, which I probably could have said so many worse things about her and so much more if I wasn't so tired, because I've been talking now for about 20 minutes straight without a breath. But suffice to say that what I really think needs to happen with her, if at the end of the day the prosecution just finds that, you know what, we're not going to ruin our whole track record of getting everybody that we've gotten by ending with a giant fail, and they're just going to let it go. If they get to that point, I would wish and hope and know that there would have to be a way, just like with Alex Murdaugh, they were able to go after him for financial crimes and lots of devious tactics and, against his law license taken away and so many things, for all his, all the things he did that were so dishonest in his position as the county solicitor and just so many things. And I think Wendi also has a lot of skeletons in her closet. And I would imagine that if there was an investigation, I know there's a statute of limitations on some things, but I still think that if they were able to do a deep dive surrounding so many of the important things that she was asked on the stand, I mean, I definitely think that she tried to mislead the investigation. So you've got a hindering investigation charge. And then I think that she definitely lied to the courts on, with her filings. And so that's some kind of fraud. And I'm sure somewhere in a cloud somewhere, there's some information about her acting inappropriately with a student of hers. And, years ago, sex crimes had like an expiration date, but I'm pretty sure many counties these days have lifted them and there is no expiration date. So they might be able to look into that. And just all the theft that she did with Dan, because she just made out like such a bandit. And for her to get on the stand and say, no, we didn't benefit. In fact, it cost my children money every year is such a lie, because there were so many different areas that she gained huge finances, which is why she's never had to work again. And, also looking into, like I had mentioned, child endangerment. Because think of it this way, if there's a way that they could prove, even if she didn't have foreknowledge, like the day leading up to Dan's death or shooting, and subsequent death, maybe they could prove that very shortly after, like when her family came up there or Charlie did or whatever, if they could prove that she had after knowledge of it, then wouldn't that be really reckless to bring her children down to right where the killers reside and have just shot her husband? So there might be something there. Now, there's a lot of, I know it's murky, and I know that as time goes on, people just, rather than want her so bad, they just kind of probably are at the point where they're like, let's just let it go. Excuse me, there's so many people to prosecute in real time that are doing real crimes that are a danger to society. And I guess at some point they just have to take their resources and put them where they're best put to use. But I know for me, I follow true crime pretty, every day. And I don't think until the day that if I ever do get to see Wendi arrested and paying for how she defrauded everybody with all of her lies and, just destroyed Dan's, she tried to destroy his legacy, but we all know better. But I don't think her children do, which are really the most important opinions that matter. And those are the ones that she destroyed. So that's so bad. I would just love to see her be taken to task for that in some way, whether it's just going through a grueling court case where she has to blow so much money on lawyers, or she gets held in custody for a few months, but then she gets off because she's acquitted because they don't feel that the prosecution were able to prove their case. Or I would just love to see her made miserable for a while, just for all the deceptions that she tried to pull over everybody. So that's kind of my thought on the, what do we call them? The 7, I don't know. I have to think of a name for them. I will for my thumbnail when I upload this. The 7 somethings. It'll come to me. But anyway, that's it for now. And I just keep hoping and fingers crossed on Donna, because I really want to see her get what's coming to her as well. All right. Thanks, y'all.